The biggest mistake that I made by far was believing that the United States would help Russia, because what I recommended was based on that idea. And it was based on the idea that Russia would escape from its financial crisis through financial help from the United States and Europe. I was sure, well, there's no excuse. They didn't like the Soviet Union, but Russia, not, post-communist Russia, democratic Russia, what could the U.S. object to? Russia was trapped in foreign debt. China was not. Russia was financially destabilized. China was not. So Russia was an urban industrial economy that was facing a kind of collapse. China was just an impoverished rural economy and not in a financial crisis. So the differences were very structural.
Professor Sachs, I'm very proud to listen to you tonight, and I shared with a friend, common friend, Dimitris Avramopoulos, and he wrote to me, for you, very accurate, reliable, visionary, and objective. So, therefore, I would like to ask you a question. Looking back, which of your propositions did you change your mind about, and why?
Yeah. If I'm very objective about it, basically I've given good advice. But not perfect advice by any means. And I've learned a lot of things. But the biggest mistake that I made by far was believing that the United States would help Russia, because what I recommended was based on that idea. And it was based on the idea that Russia would escape from its financial crisis through financial help from the United States and Europe. And by the way, I also made that same mistake vis-a-vis federal Yugoslavia, because I advised Ante Markovic at in the end of 1989 and early 1990 about how to stabilize the Yugoslav economy. And the advice I gave was good advice. But it said the first thing that had to happen was that the Europeans would stop demanding debt repayment from federal Yugoslavia. And who turned that down? The Germans. Because the Germans, I believe, were more interested in breaking up federal Yugoslavia. They wanted to support Croatia. They were not interested in the Markovic plan. They were not interested in saving Yugoslavia. And so I thought that's the best chance, and it turned out to be not accepted. In the case of Russia and the Soviet Union, I thought that the biggest prize in the world was peace. And I had learned from good economics trade that the way you make peace is you help the counterpart to stabilize and to recover from a crisis. And that was the recommendation that I made. And if I may, just 2 minutes explanation of something. I became an advisor to Poland in the middle of 1989. And I told them, you can get out of your crisis. They said, but we're broke, we're bankrupt. We owe so much debt to the West. We don't have reserves. And I said, none of that's a problem. Your debt's going to be canceled. They said, what? Yeah, it's going to be canceled. That's from the old period. Now we need to look forward. What about reserves? They'll give you the reserves, I said. They thought I was a little crazy, but worth trying. It turned out what I recommended was accepted by the White House. And I was telling Vuk a story earlier today. Within 8 hours, I raised $1 billion for Poland in early September 1989 by a suggestion that I wrote on one page of a piece of paper. So the U.S. listened to me, and Poland stabilized its currency, and then within a year began economic growth and had a very, very good 30-year period.
So basically your recommendation to Russia was to do the same, but it was under the assumption that the United States was going to support in the same way that they decided to support Poland, and then this kind of support didn't come.
Exactly. And there was a meeting at the White House on June 4th, 1991, which I didn't even know about, which until recently, until a few months ago. What was that meeting? I had made a plan for financial help to the Soviet Union. And that plan was made with a small group at Harvard. Graham Allison and myself and Robert Blackwell and Stanley Fisher of MIT and Grigory Yavlinsky, who was the advisor to Gorbachev. And I made the numbers on the aid to Russia. And that plan was sent by Graham Allison, who was then head of the Kennedy School of Government, to George Bush, to the White House. They rejected it completely. And I always felt that was one of the worst mistakes, certainly of economic policy, that I know of in modern times, because it was a small amount of money. It was $15 billion for Russia, which was nothing for the United States and for Europe to bear. And they said, no, nothing. So I received, just about 6 months ago in the email, a copy of the meeting minutes of June 4th, 1991, where they rejected the plan. And these were released by a Freedom of Information Act that somebody had requested. And I read the minutes of all the statements, and I said, I could not believe how incompetent and stupid the American leadership was, that you could read in the comments. But the main point was, no help could make any difference, and anyway, Gorbachev is a showman, and we should give a public relations response. That's the literal statement of a man named Richard Darman, who was my former colleague at Harvard, and at that time he was head of the Office of Management and Budget, the chief budget officer for the president, and he said, throw it away. Don't help Gorbachev. Give some public relations statement, but don't help. To my mind, this is where I miscalculated, because I thought, this is crazy. Of course they'll help. Then, when Gorbachev fell, 2 months after that, in the putsch, and Yeltsin stood on the tank and became leader of the Soviet Union then, effectively, and then of Russia, and then asked me to help again. I was sure, well, there's no excuse. They didn't like the Soviet Union, but Russia, not, post-communist Russia, democratic Russia, what could the U.S. object to? And of course they said no once again. So if I had known that then, I would have thought differently. I thought at the time, but there is no alternative. Now I see that I would have done things differently.
But there was an alternative, because I understand, because I recall roughly around the same time there was a great moment, transformational moment in China going on, and Chinese reforms were being launched. So if Gorbachev wanted to conduct a revolution, both political and economic revolution, that ended up failing, the Chinese government, at least this is my reading of the situation, did a different choice.
Right.
They went for the economic reform and refused to accept those premises that you had in your mind. Oh, well, everybody's going to help because this is a different world. And the Chinese experiment, if you will, proved to be far more effective than the Russian one.
Except it's a very different situation. By 1991, Russia was trapped in foreign debt. China was not. Russia was financially destabilized. China was not. So Russia was an urban industrial economy that was facing a kind of collapse. China was just an impoverished rural economy and not in a financial crisis. So the differences were very structural already. And in China, there was no urgent need to stabilize the economy, whereas in Russia and in Yugoslavia,
it was a hyperinflation.
So this was a very different circumstance. But still, if you had known, okay, there's going to be no help, there are different things that could have been done.
Any last
Yes.
but short
Maybe.
question
Yes.
from a journalist again?
Professor Sachs, thank you. It was a pleasure to listen to you this evening. I'm from Russian news agency Sputnik, Serbia, and I have a question concerning Serbian economic policy. If you were an advisor of Serbian government now, what would you advise? How can Serbia confront U.S. attempts to force Serbia to expel Russia economically from the region? I believe
Yes.
you know about problems that has our Serbian-Russian oil company, NIS.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, basically, I hope that Trump perseveres against the U.S. deep state and against the European position right now and makes a settlement with President Putin. If he does persevere, this would make a big difference. And he can, but he faces all of the CIA and the deep state opposition in the U.S. and the opposition in Europe, which says, what are you doing? We've had a 30-year program to weaken Russia. Now you want to make Russia just normal partner again. And of course, my view is that 30 years was completely wrong idea. So I'm hoping that he ends that wrong idea. But you can imagine the pressure in the deep state. All of the U.S. Congress hates Russia. All of the deep state says, you know, we just need to fight for 5 more years, kill another million Ukrainians, and then things will be okay. So Trump has to persevere. If he perseveres, and it could happen in the next week if we're lucky, or the next month, then this issue will go away. Because the U.S. will be doing business with Russia. And then Serbia can say, you're doing business with Russia, so are we, thank you. So I would just wait a moment to see how things pan out. Because there's a real chance. On this, Trump is right. He's surrounded by wrong, and he's got lots of strange ideas. Maybe another idea is we give up on Ukraine, but we just go bomb the hell out of Venezuela. This is quite possible. This is as strange as things are right now. This is not a principled administration. This is a very tactical administration. But it could be that the U.S. and Russia reach an agreement that includes economic trade, in which case Serbia can say,
So
if
maybe
that
we
doesn't
should-
happen, I do really recommend talk with the Slovaks, talk with the Hungarians, talk with the Austrians who are neutral, talk with the who am I forgetting? The Czechs. I can't forget the Czechs. Talk with Mr. Babic, because they want regular dealings with Russia. And so Serbia's not alone in this.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for this wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us. Everybody's invited to a cocktail to continue the conversation with our guest. But thank you very much for being with us.